work your magic. That'll work. All right. All right.
That's good.
Everything all set? Yeah. Yeah. You want to turn me up?
I say something.
Sweet.
Sound good?
Sounds good to me. Well, welcome everyone. This is the last installment of the Veritas Exchange, and my name is Jeremy Stidd, and I am the philosophical nerd, and everything else that is boring about life is pretty much entrenched in my body. So what I want to do, first of all, I'm just going to introduce what the Veritas Exchange is all about, what our vision is, and then afterwards, allow me to read my introduction because I think it'll set up the points really well. And hopefully this talk will only go for about a half an hour, and then we can really get into some questions and answers. I hope you guys have some questions because I'm really looking forward to having some good dialogue. This definitely is going to be the non-scientific talk. This is kind of like the foundation of science, and if you like reasoning and ideas and so forth, this is the lecture that you should be at. So obviously, I'm looking forward to a good time. So I'm just going to pray real quick. If you're a skeptic in here, you can just hopefully wait patiently while I do this, and we'll get started. Father, I just thank you for this time. I thank you for the students who have come out. Just pray, God, that your hand will be upon this. And Lord, I just pray for every searching heart, both Christian and non-Christian alike. Just show them, Father, that you love them, and Lord, that as much as we think we're seeking you, you are so much more seeking us. In Jesus' name, amen. So my talk, the title tonight is called God Stay But Go Away, Issues That Terrorize Christians and Keep Non-Christians Skeptical. And really my whole point of this message is really to almost sympathize with you and to kind of connect both believer and non-believer alike, that there are things that are in our lives that absolutely tear at our soul, whether it's because something bad has happened to us or it's just like a very significant misunderstanding or a severe loss. So I'm just going to first, again, introduce what the Veritas Exchange is, and then I will read my introduction, I will give you my points, and then we will go from there. So, first of all, the Veritas Exchange. Who are we? What do we do? We are a group of scientists, philosophers, and theologians who care enough about students like you to come to college campuses and pretty much go into hostile territory. We like to give presentations, and we love dialogue and Q&A. Our physicist, Lenny Ortenzi, is right behind you. You can wave to him if you want to. You don't have to if you feel that that's embarrassing. But anyway, right, I know, right? I don't want to make you red. So anyway, so what we do is we study Christianity, but most of all, we're just human beings on the journey of life along with you. Whether you embrace Christ or not, obviously we want you to. We come from the Christian persuasion, the evangelical born-again Christian persuasion. We say that unashamedly, and we also want to know, or want you to know, that if ever that is something that interests you, there are many avenues you can go to. You can go to billygraham.org. You can call 1-888-NEED-HIM. I mean, there's tons of places where if you are pursuing a personal relationship with Christ, that definitely that is available. And if God moves on your heart to do that here, please, by all means, leave this place and go do it. I have no problem with that. But most of all, whether you're a Christian here or not, we care about you. And that is the most important thing, that we come from a long line, as one philosopher said, that people are equal and ideas are not. And we care about you whether or not that you embrace the Christian faith or not. We respect where you are. We're not going to ask for your name and phone number and follow up on you or anything like that. We're not like some weird telemarketing scheme. We don't make any money. We're poor. So anyway, if you don't believe us, then come watch us live and you'll figure that out. So this is not for any type of monetary gain. And so I just want to start out by saying that this talk is extremely personal. This is stuff that I definitely struggle with, and a lot of this is going to be not necessarily a trial run, but this is going to be kind of the initial stage. I've never given this presentation before. There will be a little bit of overtone from some of my other presentations. I did one at MCC called Is God Evil? And got a really good response from that. That's on YouTube if you want to go visit that. I went into like stuff like hell and slavery and so on, and why that troubles people. So allow me to please read my introduction, and then what we're going to do is I will highlight the points, and each one of the major issues that will be dealt with here will be couched in a real-life synopsis of a story that actually happened, because I don't want you people in here to kind of get the idea that these are just mere abstract ideas that just you kind of apply, that these things happen to real people and that we're real people and we're not just here for you to, for us to experiment on you or try new ideas. Ideas matter, and what you believe is going to determine how you behave. And so we are very excited. I'm very excited to present this. I just really want to connect with you more than anything else right now. These are issues that I guarantee you're going to deal with, and they're going to trouble you at times, and that's okay. And you're free to ask whatever questions you want. So here is my introduction, and here we go. Transparency is considered a virtuous characteristic by almost all people, and none of us most of the time will ever fully embrace it. Being fully transparent means exposure, which many times leads to rejection. This threat of rejection causes us to present a false and superficial portrait of ourselves. What transpires individually also happens corporately regarding the church. When we as Christians choose to be superficial, the institutions we are affiliated with will imbibe these characteristics out of logical consequence. Unfortunately, when the church's constituents put forth false images, excuse me, others, especially skeptics, will confront them, and many times very harshly. If we believe God, if we believe God and knew how free we were in Christ, we would be free of any guilt, shame, or deception. This would allow us, with wisdom, to be transparent to the right people, but nevertheless fully transparent. However, this process has many painful instances and temporarily may have some painful ramifications. This presentation also not only deals with Christians but non-Christians alike. For no matter what belief system you embrace, if you're not transparent and just merely superficial, you will never get to the true answers of life. So here's my outline. And what I want to do here is, for the skeptic, my hope is that you will embrace God for the first time. For the Christian, I hope that you will continue to trust Christ, and as you go along through your life, no matter what kind of transpires in your life, that you'll see that He is faithful, although it's going to be very, very difficult at times. But what this presentation will hopefully do is not make you feel so isolated to the fact that you're not the only one that deals with these issues. Unfortunately, the church many, many times has kind of jettisoned these issues out towards the side. They don't get dealt with because many preachers and many theologians alike are afraid to deal with them. Unfortunately, when you're an apologist and you're a philosopher, you can't avoid them. So that's why we exist. We want to deal with the difficulties. We want to do this. So here is the outline of the presentation. And I believe with some pushing and poking and checking out ideas, and hopefully you will find this talk interesting. I think by the gravity of the issues you will. I don't think that this is just something you can flippantly dismiss. So here's the scope of the talk. The first thing are the introductions of the issues. The issues that have been chosen are, the first one, it's going to seem kind of ironic and almost absurd, but grace is going to be the first issue we're going to deal with. And what I'm going to call the hard side of grace. There is a very difficult side of grace that many of us, I think, many times don't think about, especially if we're believers. All of us like to be the recipients of grace, but when it comes to dispensing it, it becomes a little bit of a different story. And the second one is cost. To embrace the Christian faith, Jesus makes some very difficult statements. He makes statements like you're going to have to pick up a cross. You're going to have to, in a sense, metaphorically speaking, hate your father and mother. That means he can't have any gods before him. Family cannot be before him. Friends cannot be before him. And that troubles a lot of people. And we also, and this is going to be really in light of God's justice, because we know that after this life, there, according to Christian theology, there's a heaven and there's a hell, and they're both permanent and they're both eternal, according to biblical script. We can talk about that during the Q&A. I'm not going to really go into that. But that makes the stakes and these issues all that more important and all that, that more painstaking. So the first thing I want to tell you before I tell you anything else is that I've struggled with both of these, and I continue to struggle with them. I want to walk with you, not above you. I am not here as some expert. I am here as in a sense, I'm going to give you a really lame term of myself, a life practitioner. I think I sound like I should go on Oprah. But anyway, I am a life practitioner who is going through life just as much as anybody else is. So my best attempt, I'm going to first of all talk about grace, talk about cost, and then I'm going to talk about thoughts that we can ponder. How do we respond to this? What do certain worldviews offer in contrary to the Christian worldview when dealing with these issues? And then lastly, how Christ, and I believe Christ brings the only hope, even though he sometimes makes some very difficult statements. I want you to know that at the end of the day, he is the only one that really can offer some true hope. So I'm really excited to give this. I hope that this will be interesting and definitely a learning experience for you. And, oh, there's my water. So let me just get a little bit of a drink, and we'll go right into grace. Grace. Why is it so troubling? Well, first I want to tell you the story of Frederick Almond. Frederick Almond is a young African-American kid at the age of 14 who had a perpetrator the day after Labor Day, before his first day of school, come and stab his mother and kill her, stabbing her 39 times and stabbing him over 30-plus times. And according to his own testimony, through the providence of Christ, he was able to forgive that attacker for killing his mom. And this is the hard side of grace. And this is going to be some difficult issues. The first issue I want to deal with, the hard side of grace, is one that was made famous by the atheist Christopher Hitchens, what is called the moral scapegoat. And it basically goes something like this, that first of all, and I want to say this too, by the way, I got news for you. I don't care about any scientific institution. When it comes to having trouble with God, science is the least of the problems. Science usually just is usually kind of a facade, and I know some people do have some true scientific difficulties, and that's cool, but most of the time it's the character of God that most people are wrestling with. Science has some objections and whatnot, but you can definitely see sometimes the anger of those scientists or those theologians, depending on where they side, come right through their presentations. So anyway, Hitchens wasn't a scientist. He was a journalist. If you know him, he is a New York Times bestseller of the book God Is Not Great. He also has written Hitch 22. A very profound thinker, though, very smart man. And to be honest with you, of all what you would call the new atheists, which would include Richard Dawkins, Daniel Dennett, Sam Harris, and Christopher Hitchens, I think Christopher Hitchens was probably the most thoughtful of the four. And all those gentlemen have New York Times best-selling books. Obviously, Richard Dawkins with The God Delusion. So anyway, Christopher Hitchens sets up this argument like this. So you're going to tell me that I can just throw my sin on this Jesus, and then, okay, and then everything is okay, and I can just absolve myself from moral responsibility. And that's pretty much what he says. And he's like, how can that be livable? That doesn't sound right. That doesn't sound fair. But let me make it just a little bit worse. Let's say you have a good neighbor or a loved one, and you would trust them with your kids, your money, your dog, your food, if you're secure enough. And anyway, what happens is and they'd be the ones you'd leave Fido with when you go on vacation. They could babysit your children, and then you have a criminal on death row. Has killed 15 people, ruined 15 lives, and ruined 15 families. And now you're telling me if that good neighbor or that loved one never embraces the Christian message, that person goes to hell. But a chaplain then comes, stops this killer just about before he or she becomes, just pretty much gets executed. They embrace Christ, and all of a sudden you're telling me that person gets a trip to heaven? Are you kidding me? And the skeptic says, what? That is troubling. That doesn't seem like that's fair. And then there's scandalous grace, which would be the abuse of grace. Philip Yancey, in his book, Finding God in Unexpected Places, meets a gentleman named Daniel who pretty much told him, and it was a fulfilled prophecy, that he was going to go out and commit adultery against his wife and his 3 kids. He wound up doing it, and he said, God will forgive me later. And he did, I guess. And so you also have this issue. So the first issue is the moral scapegoat, just throwing your sins on Jesus and then thinking you can go do whatever you want, the absolving of moral responsibility. The second thing is this idea of fairness, whether a good neighbor or a criminal, and you're telling me some death row inmate can don the pearly gates while good people go to judgment and be separated God from eternity. And then the last one is kind of interesting, is the gentleman with the adultery thing. Is grace that extravagantly good? So I want you to ponder those things. I want you to think about, does grace excuse moral responsibility? That's the first thing. The second subpoint is the fact of, is grace fair? And then lastly, is it really that good? So there's grace. And Frederick Allman found it absolutely freeing, forgiving his mom and his own attempted killer. The second issue was cost. And cost is really interesting because cost is something normally dealt with Christians. When you embrace Christ, he says both in the New and Old Testament, the Scriptures state, thou shalt have no other gods before me. And pretty much you put nobody ahead of God. He is supposed to be the supreme being. And I want to deal with this because this is going to be more of a Christian issue, but it also will deal with non-Christians maybe not coming to Christ at all. And that is, what happens to the rest of my family and loved ones? If I embrace this Jesus, I know the consequences of the people who don't embrace this Jesus. And that troubles me. Well, let me let you know that that troubles me too. I sometimes just don't understand why God works in the way He does. And in the next part of this, the thoughts to ponder part, we're going to take these two issues and we're going to look at them from different worldviews, and then hopefully we can come not so much to answers, because I don't have any answers for you. I think that's not my job to give you these concrete answers, because I think if there were just this kind of once for all solution, we would feel left out if somehow we didn't fit the portrait right. So anyway, let's deal with cost. Obviously, this deals with the Christian theology doctrine of divine justice, the fact that we might be separated from our loved ones for an eternity. This is extremely troubling. This is something that the church really has not dealt with. A lot of people have kind of come up and said, well, I'm glad that's not me. And we kind of leave these people over here. It's like, that's not my family. I grew up in a Christian home. I did this, and I feel bad for that person, but I don't really engage. Imagine if Jesus had that attitude, by the way. I'm glad that's not me. I'm glad I'm not a sinner. You guys are on your own. You're going to, I mean, just think about that, and just think about the pain. And there's a gentleman, actually in Ravi Zacharias' ministry, named Dr. Nabil Qureshi. He just joined his ministry, and he's a former Muslim who was converted to Christianity. And Nabil Qureshi, in his interview with the 700 Club, expressed his emotions of just how painful it is to deal with the day in and day out, just kind of struggle with this idea of cost, because it's going to cost us something. You have to remember, it cost God His Son to pay for our sin. But the question naturally arises then, is God just some God who just likes to inflict pain on His creatures? Does He like separating families? Because it sure looks like it sometimes. That's one objection. The second thing we have to come to grips with as Christians and non-Christians, is God worth following by me leaving everything? That's the second question, because God demands it. It's a commandment that it says, thou shalt not have any other gods before me. Take up your cross and follow me. He who loves their mother and father more than me is not worthy of me. All that is in biblical script. And Paul talks about it in a positive sense. He says that I count everything as dung or as garbage compared to knowing Christ and the power of His resurrection and the fellowship of His sufferings. Is God worth it? That's the next question that we ask in cost. And then what happens, and this is really where I want to sympathize with you, because I really want to get to the thoughts to ponder, because this is where I'm going to kind of give you what I have been taught, some of the insight that I've gotten, and then hopefully we can move on to how Jesus answers these, and then we can get right into the Q&A, which that's more what I'm looking forward to. Anyway, is sometimes difficult biblical passages make God and Christ obscure. And what do I mean by that is that sometimes some of the most difficult, harsh passages in Scripture, actually, when seen in their correct contextual light, actually are some of the most liberating. Now, I'm not saying that that doesn't mean that your life is going to be easy. I mean, you don't pick up a bed of roses, you're picking up a cross. A cross is a symbol of suffering and persecution. But many times, I think, to our own detriment, we misinterpret Scripture. And when that happens, we get distorted views of God. And when that happens, we really can't embrace Him if we're looking to embrace Him like we ought. But one thing that's very interesting, and now this is going to kind of bridge now into the second half of my talk, which is kind of the thoughts to ponder and then how Jesus deals with this. But I just want to remind you, the first thing we talked about was the hard side of grace and the moral scapegoat. That is, am I still going to be morally accountable? Does justice go out the window with grace? The idea that I can abuse grace, is grace that extravagant that I can abuse it? The next thing is, and lastly, is the scenario, is God fair when He dispenses grace? I mean, we hear about killers getting saved in prisons and embracing and trusting Christ in jails, and how is that fair that they get heaven and my good neighbor, or my mom, my dad, or my kid, if they don't, just because they don't embrace Christ, will spend eternity separated from God in hell? That's the first, that's grace. And we talked about Frederick Allman, who had to forgive his mom's killer, and he wanted to kill him at some point. He had to come to a point where his brother, as well as a well-known minister, really helped him get over that and was able to forgive him. Would we be able to forgive? And then the second issue was cost. Is God worth really following? Do these passages really mean what they say? Just the idea of, like, for example, I gave a message one time for a particular church group I think it's Matthew 10, 26 to 34, and it's the passage of Scripture that says, I don't come to bring peace on earth, I come to bring a sword, and to basically separate father or mother and daughter and mother-in-law and something like that, but to separate family. And it was really interesting in how we take that. But let me transition with this. The Scriptures in Christian theology, and don't you forget it, give you permission to be honest with God. I know with people who've been around me, they're almost shocked that I tell them that I get mad at God at least once every 2 weeks because I don't understand. And some of those issues really anger me. And I am a Christian. I am not ashamed to be a Christian. I don't care what people think, whether or not I fit their portfolio as what it is to be a good Christian. I really don't care. I really care about pleasing God. But does that make God easy to embrace? Absolutely not. Because sometimes life stinks, and then when God doesn't seem to be there, God stinks. And that's hard sometimes, and it's kind of interesting hearing that out of a Christian's mouth. But the problem is does any other worldview offer anything better? The nice thing is when you read the Old Testament prophets, they almost give you permission to kind of what we would say in the most respectful manner possible, of course, because you are dealing with the divine and he does control thunder and lightning and you could die. He hasn't struck me with lightning yet. Maybe he missed. I don't know. No, he's perfect. Like Jeremiah, pretty much in Jeremiah chapter 20, called God a pimp. Jonah said, I'd rather die than see these people become my brothers and sisters. Habakkuk says, your law is pretty much useless and empty. And this is the Old Testament God that many skeptics think is so cruel. And yet, Jonah said, the reason why I didn't go to Nineveh is because you're compassionate and slow to anger. Well, we got a problem, don't we? And so, Christian, non-Christian alike, the one thing I want you to do as we ponder these thoughts is to be honest with yourself and where you're at. If you truly can't embrace Christ, then don't. Because you want to be honest with yourself. You don't want to make any false professions. But at the same time, if you're a Christian in here and you struggle with loving God, you're not the only one. And you have a whole historical book full of people who were honest enough to admit it. What's sad is that many Christians don't know that. That doesn't mean you become a jerk. But what it means is we have permissions. Read the Psalms. I mean, David is an emotional roller coaster. I mean, he would need Ritalin. I mean, he would need rubber walls, possibly a helmet with the emotional swings that man has. But we're drawn to that. Why? Because he's so authentic. We're dying for transparency. We're dying for authenticity here. And the hard side of grace is something we really think about. Cost is something we really think about, and it troubles us. And if we're Christians in here, we're so scared to admit it because we think we're going to make God upset. Well, someone already beat you to the punch. I mean, both Moses, Elijah, and Jonah all asked to die, and all for 3 different reasons. Jeremiah was so sad he asked God, or he told God, he said in Jeremiah 20:18, and with this I'm going to transition into thoughts to ponder, why have you made me or born me? By the way, he said cursed was the day my father and mother got the news that my mom was pregnant, by the way. That's how miserable he was. And that doesn't mean you're not going to have like joyful moments in Christianity. I hope you don't think like you embrace Christ, you're just going to be absolutely miserable. I hope I'm not painting like a nasty picture like that. But anyway, there are some great joys, and the best one is being forgiven of your sin. Jeremiah 20:18 pretty much states this, that why have you brought me into this world to see toil and sorrow? Why have you brought me into this world to see toil and sorrow? Tell me that's not 2014. You're like, I didn't sign up for this life. I don't know why I'm here. I don't know what to do. And the people who don't come in and face these issues are going to live with their whole lives, and I'm hoping this will never happen to any one of us or any person in general, they will live a life of complete superficiality. The sad part is the skeptics are challenging the Christians with some of these issues, and we're not up to face them. Well, this organization is going to be different. We're going to face them, and we are facing them. And again, I want you just to kind of, when you leave here, I just want you to watch the student population in here. And they'll mock Christ and everything, but deep down inside, they're going to struggle with these same issues. I got news for you. And they'll ask the same questions Jeremiah is asking. Why was I put on this planet to deal with this toil and sorrow? And it's our job not to look down at them. It's our job to love them. It's our job to say, hey, you know what? This is a difficult issue. I understand. And that we can be the healing and just hopefully just be the compassionate people as Christians that we ought to be. And if you're in here and you're not a Christian, I appreciate you coming, and I hope that this will bring some light. Well, here are some thoughts to ponder. The first thing is that we really don't have any just or legal leg to stand on. And this is something that we have to remember. If God is perfect, and we're not, and if anyone here thinks they're perfect, well, you're deluding yourself. I want you to know that if we have contributed to the problem of evil, we really have no legal leg to say or complain to a perfect God about the problem of evil. Think about it. How can we complain about something we've contributed to? That's the first thought to kind of think about. The second part is the bankruptcy of naturalism, and I'm talking about scientific, materialistic, Darwinian, naturalistic evolution. I guess there's some portions of evolution that people try to reconcile, but I'm not a scientist. I am a philosopher. And the problem is you can't get a solid epistemological foundation to define knowledge, because if everything is just a random accident, a random just coming together or merging of atoms, then what is intelligence? How are we supposed to define things? I mean, that's the thing about scientists many times that they don't understand, is their presupposition is that there is intelligence out there to be discovered, and the fact that they're going to use intelligent faculties to figure it out. But the problem is, if everything's just a random collection of atoms, then what is intelligence? Much less now morality. Then where do we get a moral law from if everything is just fatalistic random chance? We should just be completely apathetic. Our slogan should be a big banner called whatever. That is the logical consequence. Christian philosophers have come back into the university. They have called the atheists and the non-Christians on this issue, and they have no answers. Guarantee you, they will shout as loud as they can, but the moral argument kills a naturalistic worldview. It doesn't offer anything. And let me switch the tides just a little bit here. Here's where I get very passionate, because I'm going to end this with some serious compassion, that Christ loves us, but he's mysterious. But here, let's say there's a 2-year-old girl. She gets corrupted by some criminal. He rapes and kills her. I want to ask any skeptic, and I'm looking right in the camera on YouTube, you answer me, is it livable? If death ends everything, the grave ends everything, where is the justice for that family? Oh, you're going to want an afterlife. So where's justice? There's no justice in naturalism. That's why Mao could exterminate 40 million of his own people in the name of the state. They won't tell you that. Skeptics don't tell you that. They tell you about how religion poisons everything. But Mao was an atheist. Stalin killed 20 million of his own people. What about Pol Pot? And I don't care what anyone says, the only authority Hitler had was Hitler. Hitler worshiped Hitler. He did not worship God. He was not Catholic. He appeased them. if he was truly a Christian, why did he kill Dietrich Bonhoeffer? So we have no legal leg to stand on. We know that naturalism is bankrupt. Now here's some really softer statements, because I want us to think. There's a fine line between contradiction and mystery. And most of the time we're caught in the latter. Mysteries are painful. They hurt. A contradiction, we have the essential elements like oil and water. They don't mix. Mysteries, we just don't have enough information, and they hurt. And I want you to know I sympathize with that. Because if I could undo your pain, trust me, I would. I really would. I don't wish anybody to suffer. I really don't. And I wish everyone would go to heaven too. I do. And it hurts because I know that there are possibly people in my own life that I care dearly about. I understand that cost. And it makes me mad at God sometimes. And I'm willing to admit that because I'm just as insecure and just as doubtful as anybody else, and I'm willing to admit it. I will. I could doubt this talk 15 minutes after I'm done because I'm human. We're all human in here. The other thing is beware of our limited and distorted perspective. I want you to think about that. So I want you to think about the bankruptcy of naturalism. I want you to think about our limited and distorted perspective. I want you to think about also that how tightly knit, and some of you may be taking psychology courses, that the body, soul, and spirit are tied together. And that's tough because we don't, the difference between sin and sickness, sometimes that's not necessarily just a fine line like we would like to define it. And then finally, and lastly here, is the contradiction and mystery, and then the legal platform to stand upon. And no matter what belief system, and now I'm going to transition into Christ, no matter what belief system you hold, there will always be these questions and a certain amount of uncertainty. So you will embrace any system of belief by faith. I don't care who you are. You are not omniscient, and that means that you will live by faith whether you like it or not. So the questions are, first of all, but the nice thing about logic is it eliminates possibilities sometimes. I looked at naturalism. I looked at it. It looks appealing to me sometimes. But I can't see that as livable because there's no justice in it. And even Aristotle said that the best or the most fundamental pillar of any good society is justice. So we have to think about that. That legal platform. How do we complain about something we contribute to? I want you to think about the mystery of the body, soul, and spirit. I want you to think about how limited we are in our perspectives. Because I really care. And I want you to think about, because naturalism is a big worldview here in the West, I want you to see the implications of no justice there. I want you to think about those things. Does that mean that you're just going to go and turn and embrace Christ? Probably not. But it'll make you think twice. Well, how does Christ answer these things, and how does he give the solution? We've gone through the hard side of grace, grace and morality, grace as a moral scapegoat, the extravagant abuses of grace, and the fairness of it. We've dealt with costs, what it would mean to leave certain things in my life and embrace God. We've thought through possibly some ideas, and these are by no means exhaustive. And by no means are these two issues the only issues that we struggle with. I don't want to belittle someone in here who's not dealing with this, who may be dealing with issues like uncertainty, forgiveness, and things like that. I just don't have enough time to deal with those. I've thought of those too. And that no matter what belief system we hold to, there will be difficulties. Is God worth it? Is he worth that cost? And then the other thoughts to ponder here is that bankruptcy of naturalism, the mystery of the body and soul, our limited perspective, and that in every system of belief there is always going to be an amount of uncertainty. How does Christ deal with this? The first thing that he deals with is that the ultimate problem is sin itself. That Christ does not hate his own creation. That he died for you. The cross is an ultimate example of how Christ loved you enough to pay for your sin debt in full, so that you would not spend eternity separated from him. He did everything he could. And any parent in here will tell you the greatest cost they would ever have to deal with is losing a child. And God knows what that's like. And that he sacrificed the most precious thing in his life so that we could embrace his righteousness and we would in exchange give him our sin. That's the gospel. That is the offering of Christ. If we put our trust in him, that's what takes place. But a better example would be in Job. Or maybe a prelude to the example would be a better statement here. In Job, as preachers do it, they're very sympathetic for Job when they preach through the first 37 chapters of Job. And then they're mean to Job between 38 and 42 because God's now confronting him, as if Job turned into a sinner overnight. It's interesting because you got this, if you know the story of Job, he loses everything and he still trusts God, and he has these quote-unquote friends who just batter him to death. And for 37 chapters we read of these friends' comfort towards Job. But then when God is ready to confront Job, I see so many preachers then turn kind of a nasty kind of demeanor towards Job, like if Job changed or something. And Ray Stedman, a well-known preacher of yesteryear, in his message, Life's Ultimate Questions, I believe, for the first time that I've ever heard, transition that correctly. Because God was asking Job something that is very pertinent to us. And that is this. Job, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? And then he gives 63 more questions. And the interesting thing about that is what God was doing, because Job wanted to know the answers to the mystery of human suffering. But you see, God had to qualify his servant. He had to say, Job, I'm going to give you these 64 questions. And if you can answer these questions, then maybe you can understand human suffering. But if you can't answer these questions, Job, human suffering's out of your league, bud. That's all he was doing. He wasn't trying to embarrass him. He wasn't trying to belittle Job. He's not like, where were you when I created the foundations of the world? I mean, God doesn't create subservient creatures to make him feel better about himself. I got news for you. Last time I checked, he was perfect. Perfection has no needs. So God, that would be like me having a 2-year-old kid so the kid would just bow to me at my beck and call. That's ridiculous. No parent would ever think like that, but that's the way we think about God. And the sad part about this is what Job was pretty much getting confronted by God starting in Job 38 is, if you can't understand how God laid the foundations of this world, human suffering is way out of your league. And by all means, Christian and non-Christian alike in here, I don't care whether you're skeptical or not, you will have issues in your life that you just won't understand. So how does Jesus fill that gap? How can Christ then be the only answer? Not necessarily always by what he says propositionally, but what he does. You see, Jesus wept over a person he would raise from the dead, probably about an hour later. Why did he weep? And the Greek word for weep there is the word to wail. It means he was making a public spectacle of himself, whimpering angrily. I mean, it's the deepest form of weeping you can find in Scripture. I will tell you this, he was weeping over death itself because he hates death. He hates condemnation. How else does he demonstrate that? Well, through his word. In Luke 15:7, it says the angels celebrate over one sinner repenting. Notice that the angels don't celebrate when one sinner gets condemned and judged. You need to see Christ's disposition. And here's a whopper for you. You want to write this one down. James 2:13 says, mercy triumphs over justice. So God's predisposition is forgiveness and grace rather than mercy. And how did he prove it? How does Jesus fill that gap of the lack of understanding? Easy. He became one of us. And the reason why there are no pat answers to issues like this is because each of those answers are going to be different for every single one of us because we're all made differently. But the Bible says he was tempted at all points, yet without sin, in Hebrews 4. And what's interesting, and here's the kicker, and with this I'm going to close, is the character and the words of Jesus will fulfill the gaps of the unknown like no one else. Jesus fills that God to human relationship. So when we're caught in a mystery that can be extremely painful, well, we know Christ said, my God, why have you forsaken me? He became one of us. And I got news for you. Nobody lived a more miserable life, including Job, than Christ did. If we were to look at all the lives in a big kind of, banner full of choices, the last choice we would ever want is to choose to live like Christ in terms of what we would get. Because he took our sin. You see, we're the problem. G.K. Chesterton wrote into the editor of a London newspaper when they asked, what's the problem with England? And G.K. Chesterton wrote, me. Sincerely, G.K. Chesterton. But how does Christ fulfill this gap? By becoming one of us, by living our lives and struggling. Hebrews 5:8 says that he learned through suffering. So does that mean we're always going to get answers to our questions? No. But what it does mean is that Christ will walk alongside you and suffer with you. And he suffered more than you. So honestly, he can say, I know what you're going through, and then some. And when he cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me? And this is right from Os Guinness, Corrie ten Boom, and C.S. Lewis. I take no credit for these statements. You look at a guy like Elie Wiesel or Simon Wiesenthal, people who lost people in the Holocaust, and I have such a broken heart for those types of people. And what they pretty much, Guinness makes an illustration with them, but he makes this statement: the reason why God cried out in, my God, why have you forsaken me? Because what he wanted us to know in our deepest agony, Christ truly embrace God's absence. So in our deepest pain, we would only embrace his apparent silence. And that's the offer of Christ. Will he always give us those answers? No. But there's a fine line between contradiction and mystery. So let's just finish with this, that he offers you that free gift of grace, and you can embrace it if you want it. But here's the thing. We want you to know the elements are difficult sometimes. And we went through and we talked about them. We talked about the hard side of grace. We talked about grace maybe at the expense of justice. But I got news for you. Christ is perfectly balanced. He's not going to let one thing slip from him. What about the moral scapegoat? Well, we can throw our sin on Christ, because if we can't, then there's no hope for any of us. Then we address the issue of cost. Is God worth it? That's a question all of you need to personally think about. That's what I need to think about. We talked a little bit about divine justice in hell. That's tough. That's tough stuff. But yet, what about that little girl? What about those people who never get justice on earth? And if death ends, if life ends and everything extinguishes at the grave, there's no such thing as justice. Let's quit fooling ourselves. And then, of course, difficult biblical passages of Scripture sometimes distort our view of God when they're taken out of context. So those were the two issues. Then we moved into some perspectives. We, contributing to evil, have no right to complain about evil. We are part of the problem, therefore the part of the problem cannot complain to the solution to the problem. There's a fine line between contradiction and mystery. We're caught in a mystery. And I want you to know as a Christian, I hurt with you even though I don't know you. Whatever your pain is, again, I wish I could take it away. I really do. I care about each and every one of you. And even sometimes, the relationship between body, soul, and spirit knit together, that's a very big mystery, and we're still trying to figure that out. And that we have a limited and distorted perspective. Then I went to Christ's answers. He will not always give us propositional answers, but the cross takes that place. The problem is sin. God does not hate humans, he hates sin. And if we don't accept his sacrifice, sin is still on us, and he has to be just. And then finally, with Job's qualifying questions, if we can't understand how the foundations of the earth were laid down, how do we even begin to think that we can understand human suffering? But then Christ became one of us and embraced that mystery, being the eternal God-man. And if you receive him, will all your answers be just everything will be a bed of roses? No. But will you have real life for the first time? Yes. And that's what he offers, and that's the best I can do, and that's what I offer. And I thank you for your time. That's it. So let me just get a swig of water, and I hope you have some questions, because I really want them. And I hope that that wasn't too philosophically abstract and boring. I hope it made you think. So anyway, fire away. Wow.
Okay, I got it.
Sure.
It seems that the Hitchens, I think it was
Christopher Hitchens, sure.
the one you quoted about how he couldn't handle the whole, a little kid gets abused,
Mm-hmm.
and then the guy gets forgiven or something like that.
Right, yep.
And then you mentioned something that almost was the same kind of story, and then how there's better be an afterlife
Yeah,
because of justice.
yeah.
It seems like you both have that same frustration, but you've come to entirely two different conclusions.
Yep.
Oh, his coping mechanism was, well, there can't be a God because that's not fair.
Correct.
And then your way would be, there's got to be a God because that's not fair.
Right, and just so the question is the moral scapegoat, but the mystery of both sides, and there's mystery to both sides. I feel sometimes like I have the mystery of human sin, and I think Paul called it the mystery of iniquity, where you have something like a little kid who's abused, corrupted, everyone that pretty much, unless you're just absolutely lost your mind, would think is just gruesome and horrible. And Hitchens took he, as far as we know, because he's passed away in 2011, he died of cancer, and my heart really goes out to him and his family. You have this two-sided argument where he's trying to comfort himself by getting rid of this God because somehow God is not fair. But at the same time, he also wants to get rid of the afterlife with him. And if you get rid of the afterlife, then there's no justice for humanity, and we are all kidding ourselves. And therefore, we might as well just start supporting some type of might makes right or whatever the state wants to do, because that is a severe mystery either way you go. And I know some of you in here, maybe this is the first time you've really kind of maybe had someone robustly think about this. But to be honest with you, sometimes, Lenny, just to finish up, certain answers to questions are better answered by better questions. And that is a better one. Like, okay, let's get rid of the afterlife. Well, great, there's no justice. So what does that say to the person who's gotten robbed or killed or corrupted? And we need to take a very extreme example with an innocent person, like a baby or a kid or something like that. But then yet, on the other side, you'll see people get rid of God for the same reason. And I don't really have much of an answer except for the fact that either way you go, you're stuck. And you're going to have to come to a decision on that because it's very painful. And, but a life without justice to me is just completely vain and not worth living at all. Not at all. And that's why we have anger problems, because we don't believe in justice. We don't believe it's actually going to happen. Okay. Nice. Man, that must have meant I really communicated my ideas pretty well. Man. Somebody's got to have something. Yeah. What's your name? Okay. What's your question? That's okay. You're the. That's okay.
Anyway, I still, maybe I have something, because I saw in the introduction, you are in physics major or you are teaching physics?
I'm not a physics guy, no. I'm a philosopher.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Oh, it's somewhere else.
Okay. But if you want to ask a physicist, he's the physicist, so you're more.
Scheduled for tonight, but we had to switch it
Oh,
because
that's why.
the first,
Yep.
the first week, the guy
Oh,
couldn't
the
do
first
it.
one is third week.
So I spoke.
But if you have a physics question, you can ask him.
Well, yeah, I think I already asked them. So, because I'm not sure, like, if it's really contradict, I mean, the physics and
Lenny.
creationist belief.
I'm sorry.
Oh,
I think there's a contradiction between
yeah, the
physics and
yeah,
what?
physics laws or creationist.
Oh, boy, I wish you heard my talk. It was the first.
Yeah, I missed it either.
Well, to sum it up, observational science, I have found no contradiction between observational science and the creation worldview. But you have to, it's very tricky, and that's what my talk was on, differentiate between a religion known as scientific naturalism and true observational, testable, falsifiable science. And so a lot of people haven't differentiated. They have heard since they were 5 years old these things that were almost religious, but they're not science. It's really just a worldview. And so they convince themselves that there is a contradiction between science and the creation worldview. When in actuality, there's a contradiction between the naturalistic worldview, which is religious, and the creation worldview, which is religious. The only difference is one admits they're religious, creationists, and the other one is disguising themselves as true science. You see, there's a difference between the observation and the interpretation. Interpretations of evidence usually is a worldview. It's really not necessarily science. Science has to be testable, observable, and falsifiable. Otherwise, it's philosophy. I mean, that's
Yeah.
that'd be strange.
That's right.
But like to sum up my whole talk, I showed example after example after example of things you thought were science that were actually a naturalistic, religious interpretation of evidence. It wasn't the evidence, it was the interpretation of the evidence. The example I gave was a story that we found a Tyrannosaurus rex fossil fossil evidence of the ancestor to a giraffe. It's all interpretation. There's no testability. There's no science in that. But he believes religiously in evolution, so he showed slide after slide of similarity and convinces everybody in his bio class that he proved common ancestry. He didn't prove common ancestry. He proved similarity. Well, great. I have 3 houses on my block that are similar. That doesn't mean it's a common ancestor. It means a common designer. You choose how you interpret the evidence. Evidence is science, but the interpretation is philosophy.
You got it. And that's why I stand here.
You're saying actually science, the true real science, doesn't in favor of either side.
Excellent.
Let me answer that question. I can answer that question. I will answer that question because, yes, there is a fine difference between science and morality. When you get into issues of ought or things that ought to be, science demonstrates how things happen. For example, I will give you John Lennox's example of this. He says, if I go to poison my grandmother's tea, science will say it'll severely affect her health. But it will never disclose the motive of why I'm doing this. And let me give you a better one. When you if you believe and embrace the scientific notion of the Big Bang, what do all people say about the Big Bang starting point, which they call the point of singularity? It's the point where all physical laws break down. That is not science. When physical laws start breaking down, that is a metaphysical religious position. And that's a way just to hopefully help you differentiate. But everything, see, what's happened is you've had these people come out and say, we want, like for example, John Shelby Spong said, we want a non-theistic view of God. Well, what does that mean? Or scientists say, we want to write papers without philosophy. Well, the problem with that is my nerdy little philosophical mind, that is a philosophy. And that logic just kicks you in the teeth. I had a kid who I argued with for 2.5 hours saying if science could disprove intelligence, I would embrace it. I asked him, is that intelligent? And you can see the absurdities of this. And science and morality do not mix. They are 2 separate entities. So when you make your evaluation of things, what he's saying is be very careful because science can very much slide into metaphysics. And that, my friend, comes with anything that's non-scientific. And there is, even David Hume, for example, said, you cannot get from a scientific is to a moral ought. Can't happen. It's impossible. Science doesn't say a rock falling on somebody is right or wrong. It just doesn't answer that question. It's not its job. Easy. Lenny just gave you the qualifications. If you can have evidence and it can be demonstrated and falsifiable, that's science. So then a lot of the things, now for example, and this can be done through very simple experiments or very complex mathematical equations. Like right now, of course, one of the greatest disciplines that we're starting to get into, obviously, is one epigenetics, and the other 2 is obviously the subatomic world. We don't have a clue how those things work out. There's a lot of mystery there. But to find the existence, for example, of a neutrino is just not going to kind of waggle its finger and say, hi, I'm a neutrino and I'm here. No, it's meant to be discovered through complex mathematical algorithms and computer programs and so forth. So a lot of the times, and I think this is the way God reveals himself. Look at electricity. Electricity's been here ever since the beginning of time. But it didn't waggle its finger, but it was discovered, and now it can be used. I think God's the same way. That God's not just going to kind of demonstrably just throw himself on people and just say, hey, I'm God and I'm here. Hey, pay attention. He has done that in some senses, but he also will allow you to discover him. And just like electricity, if you don't like the way God's really revealed himself, well, then you hate the way you do science, really. Because science is all about discovering things that we don't know yet. So, but to move from science to religion, because we have been so sometimes indoctrinated with rhetoric saying this is science, this is science, this is science, this is science, that sometimes, and then we look like we're just some obscure, stupid-looking minority when we call these people on these things. But that's why logic is so important, and logic and intelligence is the foundation of all science. Right? And so without logic, you're not going anywhere. But let me give you a cardinal rule. Logic is phenomenal at disproving things. It is terrible when trying to prove inductive things. Like logic can say something is wrong, but that doesn't mean my point of view is correct. I just want to kind of, so like I could say, well, logic says system of belief X is wrong, but that doesn't make Christianity automatically correct. So, but it's really good at eliminating possibilities. And unfortunately, I know you walked in late. One of the things that I dealt with naturalism is that there's no justice because there's no morality, because everything is just random, unguided processes. So then where's the justice in that? Everything should just be fatalistic and we should just be one big apathetic society. Yeah? What's that? Because life without justice is unlivable. Okay.
But out of that, there is no real justice.
Okay. And then why shouldn't we then go and release every prisoner now in our U.S. prisons?
Because we are still inside of society. We cannot live.
Well, who determines, which person in society determines what's right and what's wrong?
It's the whole history of
The whole history according to whom?
the whole group of people.
The majority? Really?
I think so, yeah.
Oh, I would be so sure about that. They poisoned Socrates for that. and if you look throughout, things have changed. For example, then, homosexual rights shouldn't then be there, should they? Because majority doesn't agree with that. But yet they do get those same rights. So, wait a minute, just hold on, one sec. And I'm not picking them out. It would be the same thing for a time with women, that they wouldn't get equality if someone did not challenge, in a sense, the apple card. So what group or what society, if there is no foundation for a moral law, says what is correct and what's wrong? And if morality is just a social construct, then it really doesn't exist, and life is completely pointless. And unfortunately, we can say, well, we can have meaning by creating it within ourselves. But then, if my meaning says your meaning is wrong and I can just shoot you, well, okay. So we have to pay the piper. We have to confront these difficulties. I believe that the only reason why humans, and I got news for you, you get on the wrong end of a stick and you want justice, it's unlivable. Life without justice will be unlivable. And it's just like, if someone came up, for example, and hurt someone you love and killed them, and they never got caught on earth, and the grave ends everything, would you just shrug your shoulders and just walk away from that?
Well, the problem is, I'm pretty sure there are many situations you cannot have the ultimate right justice there.
Depends on your worldview. Depends on what you believe is true. And I would say, young man, that you would be, and that doesn't mean that just because this is one of the biggest problems I deal when I come in with naturalists, and I'm going to get to your question in just a second, is the fact that if everything is random, unguided processes, there is no morality. Let's stop fooling ourselves. Might makes right. That's really what's going to be. It's going to be survival of the fittest. And that's what's going to happen. I mean, and that's just the way it is. And if you don't, and they tried to do that in the Holocaust. That's what they tried to do. So if you can tell me of another foundation, the reason why we as human beings find it almost unlivable To live without justice is because we have a sense being put in us according to Christian theology that we're created in the image of God and God is just and that He will deal with it. And when you throw resurrections in there, if Jesus really rises from the dead, that makes everything crazy. Because now people are going to come back to life. Job asked in Job 14:14, well, if man dies, will he live again? So now, if there's a resurrection, then someone's going to answer to something. And so you have to say, well, then you have to ask what Pilate asked. What is truth? That's why I'm a philosopher. Philosophers don't make much money. I can guarantee you that. They always have the joke of, what's the difference between a large pizza and a philosopher? A large pizza can feed a family of 4. So philosophers can't. But that's why we have to think about these things, whether we come to an agreement or not. Okay, young man.
So you're saying that because the world doesn't have its own inherent justice, and because the justice imposed on ourselves by ourselves isn't true,
Yep.
then the necessity, that creates the necessity for religion to be that great equalizer where, a man commits an evil crime, doesn't get punished in life, he's sure as hell going to get punished after life.
Sure.
But I think that I think that it's true that the world doesn't inherently, by its own natural laws, have a justice because I could, walk outside, be killed by a bear.
Yep. Right.
But that doesn't mean that justice is not need. It doesn't mean that we don't need justice, because yes, we do need justice.
Okay.
For ourselves, and it doesn't mean that we should go all survive by might and stuff like that. But
Wait, let him finish, young man. Go ahead. Go ahead.
but I think we still can just live by our own justice as a human culture.
Okay.
Because you don't really need to be proven that something is evil. We kind of know that. We know that if I kill somebody, that's evil. I don't need the promise of God or anything to
Okay. What's your name, young man, by the way?
Eric.
I like the way you think, by the way. It's very thoughtful.
Tell us it's right. We need us to tell us it's right. We just need to have empathy for people. Empathy and
Right.
Don't be a dick.
Right. Okay. But the problem with that, Eric, is that right? Okay. Eric, the issue with that is where do you ground that philosophy? Okay, you see what I'm saying? Is that to me, and I'm not arguing for any other theology but the Christian one, okay? So like I'm throwing out general theism, everything, and I'm saying that pretty much at the base level, the reason why we're just according to Christian theology is because God has endowed it within us as being created in His image. That because when someone, and I guarantee you, you take $10 from a naturalist and they will come after you, just like anybody else will. And you take $10 from a Buddhist or $10 from a Christian, there's a sense where they will become a hypocrite of their own moral law if they truly extrapolate the logical consequences. And you said that, Eric. You said that correctly about naturalism. And so what happens is, first of all, the question then becomes, and there are people like Nietzsche, for example, didn't believe in morality at all. He dismissed it completely and he went insane, but at least he was honest. He said, life really has no purpose, just be courageous. And so don't get me wrong, but you notice, and see, this is the issue that I have. Nietzsche and the people who, and I have a lot of respect for Nietzsche, by the way. I respect a lot of what he did. He was a very thoughtful atheist. I agree nothing of his conclusions, but I will say this. In The Madman, have you read that? Have you read The Madman? Okay. In The Madman, when he talks about the elimination or the domination of like might makes right, because pretty much that's what he said would happen. In there, he makes the idea of who will give us the sponge to wipe away the horizon. What sacred games will we need to play? And what he was saying is, and then he predicted that the 20th century, and he predicted prophetically and correctly, that the 20th century would be the bloodiest century ever if my way comes in. And he said, my ways or my ideas are not popular now, but give me 100 years and watch. And now the death of God movement is everywhere. And so what Nietzsche was saying, though, is how are we going to ground right and wrong? Because, you see, the problem is some person can come and say, then all life is meaningless. Well, is that a meaningful statement that just came out of your mouth? And see, we got to think. And see, and Eric, wherever you're at in terms of your own journey in life, you know, I mean, you have to be honest with yourself. And I think you're a very honest person, by the way. I really appreciate the question. So just the things I would make you kind of ponder is again, just which, if morality is grounded in what? And that's the things that we have to ask. And they can be very troubling. And just because I didn't see you in my presentation, there's a fine line between contradiction and mystery. And a lot of times we don't have a lot of information. And unfortunately, that makes it difficult a lot of times for us. And whether we're Christian, non-Christian, and by the way, I have no disrespect towards any system of belief or any disposition in here. I don't care if you're a Democrat or Republican or whatever, political, whatever. I mean, I will go according to Christian theology and what I feel about those things, but at the same time, I don't think any less of any person. And I just want to say that, just in case you think I like hate people or something. I don't. So very well thought out statement, but the thing of it is you got to, at the end of the day, Nietzsche was asking what Christians are asking, how do you ground morality without God?
Well, that's been happening. Everyone kind of grounds it differently. You ask one person,
Sure.
is it illegal to smoke, or is it wrong to smoke pot? One person would say, like, it's in the law.
Well, I mean, it depends on the issue, too.
Right.
Right. Okay.
Somebody, it could be, oh, it's in the law. Bad.
Okay.
Or, oh, no, but it's not hurting anybody. So then, you know, what if...
According to whom's definition of hurt?
Well, that's exactly it. Everybody has their own subjective meaning of what hurts them, what they would care about, what others would care about through their own mind.
But do you see the possible chaos in that?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
It's mind-numbing to think about.
Okay.
It's almost impossible to
Okay.
ever come up with a universal system of a belief because everything is so...
Well, not because according to Christian theology, there is a universal system. It's just been rejected.
Yeah, okay. A universal system agreeable upon by everybody.
Well, I mean, but truth doesn't necessarily ask for agreement. Like if I want to disagree with gravity, I'm still going to fall out like a big Wookiee, and no one's going to catch me. I'm just going to be caught in a net and just thrown away somewhere.
In any case, that
Yes.
true truth is still unknown. If it's out there,
Okay.
we have so many different opinions that no one's sure what is the
Okay, and that's your opinion. I disagree with that, but I respect your position on that. Okay. Yeah.
So I agree with what he said.
Okay.
It's just I believe every people when they make some statement,
Mhm.
they just subconsciously, maybe unconsciously, they always have their ground. You know, the
Based on what?
Basic belief.
Right.
I don't know what that is. That maybe
Well,
many people actually don't realize it, but they always have something. And I believe every person has a slightly different version of that.
right. But you got to be careful there because you're discerning. You're messing around with factors. What we have to say is when you're communicating with me, I'm assuming certain words coming out of your mouth have a certain definition. But what I'm saying is there's a difference between preferences, okay? There's a difference between preferences and hard knock truth, okay? I mean, we know gravity is negative 9.8 meters per second squared, okay? You and I both understand that, right? But what we think might be beautiful is a completely different category. So you don't want to mix up the categories. One is aesthetic, one is a scientific fact. So again, my question to you is where are these facts grounded in? It cannot be in human preference because we have 7 billion people on this globe, and it's growing, and we'll have 7 billion different opinions. And all I have to ask you, if I want to be a jerk, is say, what if my truth says your truth's a lie? Then we got problems. I believe there is an absolute truth, but I think it's dependent upon, I think you can only ground that supposition, all of logic, intelligence, and knowledge and morality only by not only God, but the Christian God. Because, and it's kind of ironic, if you read John chapter 1, the Greek word for Jesus in John chapter 1 is the Greek word logos, where we get the word logic from. And Romans puts an indictment that God has revealed in creation and in our consciences His existence. And because of our sin, we have suppressed and dismissed it and worshiped the creation rather than the Creator. Sure.
What is the relationship you can expand that the God, the logic, and the science?
Okay. You want me to explain a little bit about it? Sure. That because science, here's where the naturalistic theory breaks down if you believe in random unguided processes. Okay? That just atoms just came together, they collided, and here came the universe, and out of this explosion, here we are, by accident. Okay? Well, the problem with that is a philosopher, that means our communication is just the fatalistic chance of the neurons passing through our brains and coming together. But I'm assuming, even before I speak to you, that what's coming out of your mouth is intelligent, right? Yes. Okay, right. And that my response to you is also intelligent. So before a scientist can do any type of experiment, their predisposition is intelligence. Intelligence is based on logic. Logic is based on an intelligent mind. That mind has to be God. It cannot be dirt.
Wait. It has to be God.
Oh, it has to be God.
Our logic is like God.
Okay, wait, let me finish. I can't have two people going on at the same time. Yeah.
So you're saying not.
Now, I'm not saying you have to agree with me in terms of it has to be the Christian God, but it's got to be something. Okay. It can't be dirt.
Anyway, you're saying our logic is coming from God.
Yes. I believe that because logic comes from intelligent minds. Intelligence comes from intelligence. How do you get, wait a minute, C.S. Lewis said, how do you get reason from unreason? How do you get intelligence from non-intelligence?
That's a good question, actually.
I know. That's why I like saying it.
But the thing is computer has logic.
Only because it's programmed by a very intelligent designer. And if you want, and I'm not trying to belittle you in any way, but I want you, if you want to listen to a really good lecture on artificial intelligence, there's a lady at MIT and she is a Christian, so I'll just give you that up front. So if you want to see a Christian point of view of this type of stuff, her name is Rosalind Picard. And what she does is she builds robots for mentally retarded, handicapped people in order to help them live their lives on a normal basis. And she can do a lot better job, and then that gets into the idea of the existence. She deals a lot with the existence of a soul, things like that, things that were because, and you bring up a good point, by the way, and let me tell you something. Robots and computers are doing more and more that humans can, and of course, but yet our DNA molecule is so complex, it's beyond, Bill Gates says it wipes out the most complex software program. It's just beyond recognition.
But logic is the same logic, right?
But logic comes from a mind. Computers don't have a mind. Like when Deep Blue won at Jeopardy, he's not gonna take Deep Pink. He wasn't happy. He just was because he was programmed.
Yeah, no, but if we are not talking about anything else, we are just talking about logic.
Yeah.
And the computer's logic and our logic is the same logic.
But only because we intelligently programmed that computer.
Yeah, I mean, we are not talking about origin because in your case, our logic origin is not coming from us, it's coming from God, the same as the computer's logic is coming from us. So if we are not talking about where it comes from, it's the same logic, right?
Yeah, but I mean, but the origin, it's dependent on the origin of where it comes from.
Okay, so my question is, how do you understand between the logic and the intelligence?
Logic and intelligence? Logic is the foundation for intelligence. Because if there's not a strict, like for example in semiotics, okay? Like that sign back there says exit, right? Okay, you'll agree with me that says exit. Does the physics of that light and the makeup of that sign express what that sign would say. Basically, you can't get the message of something just by studying the scientific properties of what it's made of. For example, I can't get the message of a newspaper by studying the relationship between the chemistry and the ink to the paper and things to that effect.
Because it brings extra information.
But it doesn't bring the message.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
That's what I'm saying, that
Extra information.
you need logic and intelligence so that you can have an absolute definition of what that means. Okay, but you see the problems you're running into. You see the problem, because if we can all define that in different ways, there's going to be chaos.
Well, yeah, we have to define it in a universal way. That's true.
Okay, that's all. I got to move on, but because I really enjoy dialoguing with you. But you're correct, and I think you're seeing some things to think about. I mean, that's all I really just want you to think about that type of stuff. Is that coherent? There are 3 tests for truth: coherency, consistency, and empirical adequacy. And so, I mean, 1, does it relate to what we see on the outside? Like if we put a word down, does it relate to the external phenomena we're trying to describe? But mostly what I deal